Unfortunate but not unexpected news in the world of Marathon, Destiny 2, and Bungie. Bungie has just laid off huge portion of their staff. Some people are saying as many as 400 employees, everyone from dev team to executives, and we really must ask, are we seeing the end of Bungie Studios? They've actually put out a letter about this, so we're going to do a quick read off. I'm going to highlight some parts that I think are actually pretty important to the way they're going to proceed in the future. First off, we're seeing a reduction in force as we reorganize Bungie. Now, this word reorganize is very important. Sony, within the same day, one of their C-level executives said that they are committed to Marathon through Season 1, 2, and Year 1. So that puts us to about Season 5 of Marathon worth of content. And Bungie has been pretty candid about the content we have coming in Season 3 and past that, but it is no secret that Marathon has not been the rampant success that Sony was hoping it would be. Though that being said, within the world of extraction shooters, Marathon is doing very well actually. It's got a very consistent audience, it sold quite a few copies, it had some hiccups in early Season 2 with, launch issues, people not being able to play, and some stuff around the PvE mode, but that all matters with the statement reorganize Bungie, because Marathon is actually going to add a limited PvE mode in the hardest map in the game, the endgame map, Cryo Storage. Now, the loot you get through this mode is not going to go into the regular game, so it really is just its own exclusive game mode where players who want to experience Marathon but don't want to fight other people can dive in and actually utilize the mechanics and have fun with all the loot and guns and stuff that's in this game. Because if we look at the history of Destiny 2, what we have to recognize about Bungie fans is that a lot of them didn't actually interact with the PvP stuff in that game. The completion of Raid and Coliseum type DLC was actually very, very low when you look at the achievements and trophies. So with the reorganization of Bungie is going to come a reorganization of Marathon as a platform to be more diverse and suit more types of gamers. And we'll get into why Bungie is choosing Marathon over Destiny 2 here in a second. The next statement, as the leaders of Bungie, past and present, we recognize Destiny 2 fell short of expectations these past several years. Following our final content update to Destiny 2 and with our future projects still in early incubation, we unfortunately could not continue operating at our previous size. Now, the final update of Destiny 2 was actually very successful player number wise. There were a lot of people in the YouTube community, most notably Aztecross, who were really rallying their subscriber base to play this game on update day. And while it didn't quite reach 1 million concurrent players, it got pretty dang close. But I think under this statement, there's the truth of the reality. Destiny 2 has not been a profitable game for almost 5 years now, and this final update, even though it got a lot of players, you have to question how many of these players already owned all the content in Destiny beforehand. So you have almost 1 million people who hop on the servers, and most of them probably own all the content. So even though you put all this work into, putting the final stamp on Destiny 2, giving the final product, not much money was actually generated out of it. I would actually stand to reason that Marathon, since release, has probably generated more money than the final update to Destiny 2 did. Also make note of the statement, projects still in early incubation, because before Bungie sold themselves to Sony, they had quite a few projects in incubation. Some of them have been spun off into other Sony projects headed by other dev teams, but I think the real function of Bungie that people missed when Sony purchased them was that they were supposed to set up Jim Ryan's live service kingdom. Part of that was coming into Sony with some projects already cooking up, but also teaching Sony's other teams how to develop live service. And we're actually going to go to Bungie's Wikipedia page because there's a lot to decipher here about the history of Bungie from 2020 leading up to now that I think is going to illustrate a lot for people who may have passive anger at this situation but haven't really dove deep. At the end of the day, this downsizing of Bungie has happened a few times, and it is not the fault of Marathon. It's the fault of the live service direction of Sony and Jim Ryan that has really resulted in a lot of failure. There's only a few games you can say that came out of that project that are any good, and most of them are not even successful, even if they are good. Some key points I want to establish here before we go forward. We have to accept that Destiny 2 was failing for years before Marathon ever came out. That's actually part of the reason they decided to let Sony buy them, because Bungie was facing insolvency. And if we go back to the history of Destiny, Destiny 1 was actually the single biggest gaming franchise launch of all time, so they made quite a bit of money there. But we have to consider that the Destiny project was gestated while they were under the publishing head of Activision Blizzard. And Activision Blizzard's original vision for Destiny was for it to come out every 3 years. So if Destiny 1 was in 2013, then Destiny 2 would have been 2016, Destiny 3 2019. But for several reasons, Destiny 2 didn't come out until September 2017. And there's also a very important game, one game that changed the entire face of the gaming culture, that also came out in 2017 September. That is Fortnite Battle Royale, and it completely changed how the mega corporations, the publishers, looked at live service games, looked at their PvP games, and really how Activision and Bungie looked at a game like Destiny. And somewhere around there was when Destiny 2 was shifted to be more of a live service product, where they would put paid add-ons onto it every year or so, maybe every 2 years. I wasn't really a Destiny follower, but we all know the business model there. But continuing to compare Destiny 2 to Fortnite, at some point in 2020, maybe 2021, Fortnite did a major overhaul to their physics system, and anything from before that period was essentially deleted from the game. Nowadays they have a mode, Fortnite OG, and it's a rebuild of Chapter 1 Fortnite map. It is not the original game files. There's no way to put old game files back into current Fortnite, and at some point this also happened with Destiny 2, which caused the deletion of the first 4 to 5 DLCs, I believe. It's actually quite a bit of content, and if you're a new player trying to hop into Destiny 2, you're not really going to have context of the story. You're going to have to learn about the story through Wikipedia and YouTube pages. Now, if you're a marathon player, you're no stranger to the lack of new player onboarding in Bungie games, but it was more than that. It was that Destiny 2 was an incredibly expensive platform to develop for, and slowly over time, less people were buying these expansions, so it became less worth the development cost until eventually in the mid-2020s, it was actually negative. And there's a very important part of the timeline that we have to point out. So Bungie terminated its publishing deal with Activision in 2019, and from this point, Destiny 2 transitioned to Steam. They were in control of their own publishing, and they took a lot of that Destiny money and started incubating new game. Now, this is something a lot of live service developers did. They would take the live service money, try to create new games. Even Epic Games did this to an extent with their UEFN system. And this came with a major expansion of the firm in February 2021, doubling the headquarters space in Bellevue, Washington, and even announcing plans to open a new studio in Amsterdam. Did that even happen? That I'm not sure if it actually happened, but they also announced a game that they expected to release by 2025, which turned out to be Marathon, which didn't come out until 2026. They were expecting it a year, maybe 18 months earlier than it came out. So they were really trying to crank out these live service. I think what a lot of publishers and developers were smelling in the air is that AAA development is way too expensive right now. It is an absolute glut of costs for various reasons, legal and corporate. And the price difference of creating a AA game isn't half. It's really like a quarter or maybe even a fifth of a AAA product. So something like Marathon, which cost about $200 million in running expenses, since it did take longer to develop, and I believe they had to reprogram a bunch of stuff multiple times. They had to get out some stolen art assets too. So in the end, Marathon wasn't supposed to be as expensive as it was. It probably would have been about a quarter of the cost of Destiny 2 total. But then you can sell it for $40, which is 2/3 of the regular price, and you have to sell less copies to make your profit. You make your profit faster, and these games still continue to sit on the shelves and sell copies. Now remember, major expansion in February 2021, and by January 31st, 2022, Sony announced their intentions to buy Bungie for $3.6 billion. So it's undeniable that to an extent, the incubation of these new titles was to bolster their valuation to Sony, to Jim Ryan, because, as we stated before, Jim Ryan had this live service idea in his head, and Bungie had the keys to the kingdom. At least they were able to sell that they had the keys to the kingdom here. Acquisition was closed in July 15, 2022, making Bungie a subsidiary under Sony Interactive. And by October 30th, 2023, they laid off approximately 100 employees. And now this was the first signs of underperformance of Destiny 2, leading to layoffs at Bungie proper. Because according to Sony financial reports this year, they had 700 million underperformance, 200 million of which was directly related to Bungie. But consider, that is not all Marathon in one package. That is underperformance since the buyout, including Destiny 2. So that's every copy they expected to sell that they simply haven't. So when you take that into account, that's not to say that Destiny 2 hasn't been selling copies or that Marathon hasn't sold multiple million copies. It's just Sony expected a lot better from Bungie. And I think a large part of this is that many of the projects that they were incubating have simply not launched yet. We're going to see a lot of that here. First, point out, according to Bloomberg News, revenue from Destiny 2 fell by 45% over previous years in 2023 due to waning population of the game. And this is actually where I have to call out the Destiny community a bit, because I know you guys were actually getting unsatisfying updates to this game. But now that it's 2026, the real hot thing for the Destiny community to do is rag on Marathon and say that Marathon is the reason that Bungie failed. Well, the numbers are simply here, aren't they? 3 years ago, Destiny players were not showing up. There's a 50% drop in revenue for Destiny 2. You can't expect Bungie to continue to develop a game so expensive if people aren't turning out. And consider, this is a drop that's actually manageable for a game with the cost like Marathon, because Marathon, as we've stated, cheaper to develop for, and once the platform is established, you need even less development time and cost to put in new updates. Whereas for Destiny 2, they were building entirely new chunks of the game every single time, which is partially what led to the vaulting of content, which in my eyes is a sin in games. Vaulting content, especially content that people paid for, really, really bad. Now, it wasn't just layoffs here. Sony kind of choked off the money, and final shape update for Destiny 2 was delayed by about 4 months to June 2024, and this is when Marathon was pushed into 2025, which is why I think the alpha was in such a stripped down state. At this point, there was probably only a skeleton crew really pushing Marathon forward, because as we see in all this next paragraph, Bungie announces layoff of 220 staff in July 2024. And this is right after final shape releases. So at this point, I actually think it was predetermined that Destiny 2 was gonna wind down. Maybe they were giving it 6 months to pick back up, maybe a year, 2 to 3 updates to see if the traffic comes back through. As we can see, the traffic from June to July did not happen. So they had 850 employees left of the original 1,200. And from that, they transitioned 155 into Sony directly. Wow, so they were just absorbing them into the Sony corporate and development structure, obviously to bolster the live service and internet offerings here, because I actually think in the 2020s, that's when Sony really picked up their PlayStation Plus service, like made it competitive to Xbox and the Game Pass. So there is something to be said there. Sony gained a little bit from this Bungie acquisition, and one of the unannounced games in a new IP that Bungie was developing was transitioned to a new studio under PlayStation Studios, revealed to be Team LFG. What is Team LFG developing? I don't know what this is. Wow, this is so obscure, isn't it? And I don't even know how active development on this game is, because I can't find a game. Team LFG, newest member of PlayStation Studios, headquartered in Bellevue. So they're headquartered same city as Bungie. Team LFG looking for group, so they're probably developing a PvP live service. Here's the problem. We're in mid-2026, and we have the numbers on live service. Not only are people really just playing old games, people that are playing new games are playing live service games. And when you play a live service game, you really stick with one, maybe two, because you invest a lot of time, energy, and money into these games, collecting skins and cosmetics and stuff. And we all know, we see the graveyard of live service games that have absolutely failed, and Sony is no exception to this. Obviously, they birthed the Concord meme, the Concord abortion, which cost $400 million, by the way, more than double what Marathon cost. I mean, truthfully, for that amount of money, Sony could have developed a Destiny 3, right? So they say they're passionate about exceptional action-based gameplay, moment-to-moment game feel. This tells me absolutely nothing. Action games that players can master for countless hours. So maybe it's an action game. And they seem to be hiring for most things: 3D character art lead, game engineering, senior game services. I don't even know what the heck they are building here. We have a blog from PlayStation Studios. Maybe we can find something here with a letter directly from them. Our first game is a team-based action game. Draws inspiration from fighting game, platformer, MOBA, life sim, and frog-type games. I don't even know what to make of that. Players will inhabit a lighthearted comedic world set in brand new mythic sci-fi fantasy. And this was posted on May 7th of 2025, so more than a year ago. I wonder what's going to happen with this project. In October of 2025, the creative studios arm of Bungie moved and integrated into PlayStation Studios to help support live service games. So I'm gonna take this to mean that the studio incubation period is done. They've decided what games they're gonna pursue, which ones they aren't. Probably most of the games they thought of, they're not gonna pursue. Creative Studio has been absorbed into PlayStation, as well as most of the pertinent developers that have not left Bungie. So Bungie at this point is kind of like a Marathon development arm and a Destiny maintenance. They're really just there to keep the lights on. Looking at the numbers, they had 1,600 employees prior to the first round of layoffs in 2023. So they had more employees than I thought. What is that discrepancy there? So they lost 750 employees in less than a year. So once Sony got their hands on the Bungie financials, I think they really saw how bad it was. Destiny 2 must have already been slipping, and I mean, Bungie just really sold themselves well. The C-level people at Bungie, they were able to get the max price they could from Sony, and now Sony has been stripping them for parts ever since. Returning to Destiny 2, the launch of Edge of Fate for Destiny 2 in July 25 had not brought a significant increase in players, had the lowest player count on Steam compared to all previous expansions. Oof, and that really tells the story here, doesn't it? If we look back to the prior update, May 2024, big spike, 314. June 2025, 108. Like, not even a third of the player base. And to be real, the update that Sony was so disappointed in, that was actually the maximum peak for this game, for Destiny 2, until the new peak, until they crushed the servers with the final update. And that chart just tells the whole story, doesn't it? And right around this time was when Jim Ryan left as well, and the live service experiment kind of dried up, because with the quarterly earnings report in August 2025, Sony CFO Lynn Tao said as part of an ongoing process, Bungie was being shifted away from independence towards a role within PlayStation Studios, part of a structural reform within Sony. This is also when Parsons announced his departure as CEO of Bungie, and the general manager for Destiny 2 ended up taking his place, and I think this is partially what gave people hope for the continuation of Destiny 2 and maybe a Destiny 3, but as this has stated, they are now under the thumb of Sony. Bungie does not make those kind of independent decisions. I think people hoping for a Destiny 3 or anything of that nature were really hoping against the universe. In the November 2025 financial report, Sony said that the levels of sales and user engagement on Destiny 2 have not reached the expectations they had at the time of the acquisition of Bungie. And this is where the impairment loss of $204 million happened. Sony later affirmed a total $765 million impairment loss for the fiscal year ending in March 2026. Now, this is underperformance from Bungie, but don't let Bungie take all the blame. Don't put all the blame on Marathon. We have to let Sony eat their crow here. Sony sincerely thought that gaming was going a completely different direction, and they wasted billions of dollars trying to get there. And Bungie is just one of those bad investments, and really, in my opinion, not even the worst investment they made. Like, Bungie, if they hadn't spent so much on it, would have been a success. The key thing here is that they spent too much on Bungie initially. Jason Schreier in here said there were no active plans for a Destiny follow-up, with Sony focusing the studio on Marathon. Layoffs were expected after the last content update. And of course, here we are today with the massive Massive layoffs at Bungie, and I don't know how many this leaves at Bungie from the original 1,600 that were acquired by Sony, but I imagine it is a fraction. I would be surprised if it's even several hundred at this point, because I don't think you even need that many people to develop for Marathon. The content for Marathon is put out every 3 months. There's nothing new coming to Destiny. All you need is an artist to crank out some skins and, you know, something fresh every couple months. There's a reason that extraction shooters have actually become kind of popular, because the novelty is in the wipe. And what I really mean by that is extraction shooters rely on enthusiasts to come back and replay the same content but better. You know, it's about optimization. It's a certain type of player, much like fighting games. And you don't have to overload them with as much new content as you do in, say, a battle royale or even a hero shooter. It's just the nature of the game, and if I relate this to Arc Raiders, this is why everyone doom posting about Arc Raiders not updating anymore or only updating every 6 months. They're just going to be wrong. That game is still going to be the anomaly in the space, and let's recognize that. Arc Raiders is an anomaly in the extraction shooter space. Hundreds of thousands of players. There was no extraction shooter that was ever getting these kinds of numbers, even Escape from Tarkov at its peak. And given all this information, I just want to conclude by saying it's very tragic what's happened with Bungie. But the Bungie we have today is far from the Bungie we knew, far from the Bungie you're probably thinking of when you consider Destiny 2, Marathon, and even their Halo roots. Now, I'll be candid, I am a Marathon player. I have never really played Destiny 2 or even Destiny 1. My experience with Bungie has a huge power gap in it. And I think that's allowed me to be very neutral on the Destiny situation, though it has attracted quite a bit of hate my way. I think it's important to illustrate Sony and Bungie's strategy for the future and why Marathon is going to continue to be a part of that. First is the $200 million shortfall, and while that may seem like a lot, that's for the entire development cost of everything that Bungie was doing. Marathon, Destiny 2, games they were incubating at Sony's behest that were later spun off into individual studios. So this term shortfall is really deceptive because Sony was assuming that Destiny 2 would cover a lot of the costs that Bungie was accruing. But even with this shortfall, Jason Schreier, who's a pretty reported journalist on this topic, has reported that there would be upwards of $500 million development costs for Destiny 3, and I honestly think it would be a lot more. There's some reports around GTA 6 that estimate it has been upwards of $1 billion to develop, and I consider a game like Destiny 3 to be something on the level of a GTA 6 because you would have to build it as a platform that could stand for the next 5 to 10 years, something you could actually add onto and not have to vault content, something that could handle massive amounts of players, a game that would be worthy of, you know, being on the box of Sony products. You would have only available on Sony PlayStation, Destiny 3. You would want to advertise it as such. But the reality is the new CEOs, the new C-level people over at Sony, they're looking for smaller games, leaner games that will make their returns faster. And truthfully, this is what a lot of the gaming audience has been asking for as well, which is really why I think Marathon is going to be a grower in the end, because despite everything, it is going to remain $40 to buy in. And as we get further and further from the Destiny 2 drama, people will buy in, they'll bring in new players, and the game is so small compared to Destiny in terms of how much content is currently available, and that makes it a lot easier to maintain and develop for. I mean, that's a key thing here. Marathon is simply a better platform at this point than Destiny 2 is, because Destiny 2 is an 8-year-old game, almost a 10-year-old game. And there's absolutely no way to update Destiny 2 to the Unreal 5 engine, and Epic Games is about to put out Unreal 6. People are going to start developing on that beast. I do think we're going to see major changes to Marathon, though. We already have the end game that's there for the hardcore PvP players, but we're going to see a massive expansion of PvE content and possibly even story-based missions in the future, because I think Sony is very aware that Marathon did not find the audience they were looking for, and it doesn't have a lot of crossover with the Destiny audience, but there is an untapped audience within Destiny that would enjoy the gameplay of Marathon if it had content that they would like to play. And on the backside, many of the layoffs today were probably related to that as well. People who were really strongly sticking to the vision of hardcore PvP, though I will say Marathon has done quite a bit in Season 2 to bolster the PvE stuff. I know they faltered at the beginning of the season, but I've heard of a lot of new players that actually enjoy the process and have hopped on for the stuff like Sponsored Survival, soon to be Cryo Archive Boss Rush too. At the end of the day, I think Marathon just had unreasonable expectations on it that it could never hope to match. There was no way it was going to cover the $4 billion cost of Bungie. There was no way it was going to cover the massive shortfall in Bungie's budget, which, by the way, that was Sony's fault, not Bungie's fault. Sony owns Bungie, shit rolls uphill in the corporate structure. And because the Destiny fans were already so hurt, reasonably hurt, over the lack of content, the vaulting of content, the mishandling of the game they love so much, as soon as Marathon came out, it gave them an easy target to bully. It gave them a way to attack Bungie, essentially, where if they couldn't get the game they wanted, then Bungie didn't get to live. In a really selfish way, it was like no one could have Bungie but them. But I do understand where they're coming from emotionally. I try to be a little more even in these situations. Because like I said, I didn't play Destiny. I did download Destiny though. I'm going to tell you right now, I haven't asked for a sub yet, but if you want to hear my opinions on Destiny 2, as someone who's never played Destiny 2, stick around the channel because I'm going to be doing a massive review in the future.